Our next speaker is Supervising Attorney at Disability Rights California. Paula brings over 3 decades of legal experience and deeply personal perspective to our advocacy. After surviving a major auto accident, she became a passionate voice for individuals with disabilities, especially in employment and reasonable accommodation. Her lived experience with traumatic brain injury and PTSD fuels her commitment to educating and advocating for others. Paula transitioned from private practice in labor and employment law to focus on disability rights, and she continues to make a profound impact through her work at DRC. So please welcome Paula Tobler. Paula, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Bobby. That was very nice. I'm going to start by putting my email in the chat because I will forget to do that. So I had it all typed up and ready. It has been such a pleasure to be here. As you can imagine, in my job, I hear all stories of people that are having a difficult time, many of them state employees. So hearing the talks like Nick talking about his perspective and the other leadership that's going on and how changes are in the works. And there is what's especially exciting is not just a procedural change, but there seems to be a really push for culture change and for, you know, changing the hearts and minds kind of more than just, doing mandates. Because that's what I find is it makes a huge difference when you have people that actually believe in the cause versus people that you've told you have to do this because it's the law. And then sometimes there's a lot of, well, how can we do the bare minimum or how can we get around the law? So it's really exciting to and uplifting for me to hear those statements. So I talked to Bobby about coming here and talking about a project I'm working on with Disability Access Services about neurodiversity in the workplace. We're doing a whole series. So I know the first of the series that I was primarily on camera for did not get recorded or the recording was problematic. So, there's problems, technical issues. So it did not get posted, but the second is posted on the DAS website. And then the third one is on February 2nd, and I will be involved with that with some other people. So, and that session is going to be on supervision and best practices for supervision, which, as we have been talking about today, I feel very strongly has to do with all employees. If you have the skills to supervise people with disabilities, then you are a better supervisor and manager for all your people, even the people without disabilities. And it leads to more productive and creative and better work teams and workplaces. And I feel very strongly, and this came up in the last conversation as well, that there is especially a huge misunderstanding of non-apparent disabilities. There's a huge misunderstanding in, like the example of needing a wall for not being interrupted visually, where people think, well, I could just ignore people when they're walking by so other people can't. And they don't understand that if you have ADHD, for example, that might be very difficult for you. It's not the same as somebody else trying to ignore something. There are so many heartbreaking stories I hear of people on the autism spectrum who need different communication styles and training styles. And there's just a total misunderstanding. It's like if you do not fit in the box that I'm used to, I'm a manager now, so I get to tell you how to do things. You can do it my way or the highway. There's a lot of resistance and misunderstanding. And I think the best case scenario is someone does not understand that when your brain works differently, it just works differently. And they think that you're able to, but you're just not willing. I still find that problematic because what does it matter? You know? And then all the way up to people that just don't care. Like if you don't do things the way they do it, then we don't want you working here. You should go find another job. And we've heard comments like that as well, which is very problematic because that's not the legal standard either. Um, so I've been diving into, I think I've said this at other DAC meetings in the past, but I grew up with a brother a year and a half older than me on the autism spectrum, but not diagnosed. Um, and I can understand why people find it difficult to be working with someone with that their brain works very differently and their communication style is very different. Because I spent a lot of my time as a child just really perplexed by, how could you not get that, or how can you not understand that would be the reaction if you said that to mom, or whatever. And I was kind of his sounding board and advisor to try to help understand and navigate the world. But that also has been one of my greatest strengths, not just in the reasonable accommodation of work I do, but in life, in relationships, and in every job that I've had. Because I was trained from early on to realize there are honestly people that are not just like me. And if I can learn different ways to communicate, if I can learn different ways to operate, if we can come together and try to understand each other, um, then we can work more effectively and everything goes smoother. And I think too many people have not grown up that way, and then they don't want to learn it as adults. But it's very important to do because it's not just people with disabilities. You may have noticed in your life there are some people, we've recognized this in our education system. We recognize there are people that learn verbally, there are people that learn written better, people that need hands-on learning. There are different learning styles. And then somehow we expect when those kids get out of school and go to work, they suddenly drop all their different learning styles and become, you know, all the same and all fit within the box. That's just not the way that reality goes. There are differences. And then I came to my neurodiversity through being hit by a truck and having a traumatic brain injury. Um, And I don't even talk about the attention deficit disorder that came from that. But I worked in schools where I was constantly explaining to parents, um, trying to explain to parents their children with ADD, ADHD. And it helped me because I personally understood both sides because I went from someone who did not have it to someone who did. And I could absolutely tell them it is very different the way my brain works now. And there is no way I can go back to making it work the way it did before. I've had to learn how to use my brain, a whole different brain, and do this, all the things that I need to do. That also was a really good learning experience for me that I wish other people could have. I don't wish it on anybody to, be hit by a car and get a traumatic brain injury to learn it, but it's good to have all these lessons to learn. Um, and then when it comes to, I actually was working as an outreach counselor in schools. That's the first job that I got after years of healing, when I was not sure I could go back to being a lawyer. It was very low pay, very low glory, and it was one of the best jobs I ever had. It was so fun and so rewarding. But I did work with a, a young man in a middle school. And I don't know how many of you have middle school aged people around you or can remember back to your middle school days, but middle school age is brutal. It's a very, very difficult age. And this young man had just been transitioned into more mainstream classes instead of special ed classes. And he was excited to do it, but he was being bullied because of the differences. Now, they were referred to me for counseling and talking to them and him being willing to talk about, like, not the details of it, but just saying that his brain works differently. And when he says this, he doesn't mean it that way. He really doesn't understand. And when they're using like ostracizing him or making jokes about him, he doesn't understand what he did wrong, so he can't correct it. And we talked about being direct with him and understanding that he's more direct in his communication. And they were all in eighth grade at that time, their last year of middle school. And I'm gonna get a little emotional even thinking about it all these years later. But at graduation, I would attend graduation and I just looked over and noticed that he and his family was with that group of kids and their families all together. I knew they hadn't been to my office for a while, but I didn't realize they had become friends. He was part of their friend group. When they got past the differences in how his brain worked that they didn't understand because he looked like everybody else and they couldn't understand that things work differently for him. Once they got past that, they actually apparently found so many things they had in common and genuinely liked him enough that he was a part of their friend group. And as you know, in middle school, that is like a miracle to happen, even when there's no disability involved. It's just really hard to get friend groups to change and accept people that they haven't accepted in the past. And I think that's a lot of what I want to do in the workplace. Like just help people to understand that if you're open to different communication styles, and guess what? If you read even like Harvard Business Review and things that are not namby-pamby disability rights, they're strict business. They'll say the most important attributes that managers can have is good communication skills. Well, you don't have good communication skills if you only communicate one way, and if they don't understand, you just repeat it louder or repeat it again or whatever, and you have no ability to try to say it a different way to help people understand. You're not communicating well, probably with your people without disabilities either, honestly, even if they're not telling you that because they don't want to lose their jobs. Um, Another one is flexibility, especially after COVID. They realized how important it is for management to have flexibility and to be able to move with different situations and circumstances and different workforce issues, to be able to accommodate employees because a lot of employees that did not need accommodations after the pandemic did. Suddenly they were asking for them, but also just being flexible in other ways. So it doesn't, the same skills you learn by being able to have a conversation with somebody, talk about the essential functions versus non-essential functions of the job, and have a not a who's a problem here, but how do we sit together and look at the problem and solve it and understand that somebody asking for an accommodation is literally asking you for help to do their job better. That's a win-win, right? They're not asking for special treatment or to get out of anything. And if they were asking to get out of things of their job, you don't have to do it because that's not what the law says. So if you have those skills to be able to really think about what's essential in the work we're doing, let's not worry so much about how it's done and whether it's done exactly how I do it, but how do we get it done well? What if you're asking me for something that you need to do your work well? I love the idea of saying if it's under a certain dollar amount, just do it because it does cost a lot to fight it. But I even see a lot of fights over things that cost nothing, nothing. Just having some conversations where you try to understand one another, or realizing that a little flexibility doesn't really matter, or realizing that having a wall that maybe costs a little bit, or maybe no wall, or just being able to have more of a private space, or move to an area that's not right by the bathroom or the break room or whatever, where it's very distracting. All of these things are things that can be done and increase your productivity if you have the skill set to be able to think about essential functions, what is actually essential, what is needed for everybody in your team to be able to be as productive as possible in meeting those essential functions and accomplishing goals, and making people feel safe. That's the other thing that I think it was a Google study that showed the number one factor in I think it was retention, but it might have been just satisfaction, but was actually psychological safety. Psychological safety to be able to disclose that you have a disability or you need some help. also means that you have the capacity to have psychological safety for everybody to talk about. Maybe I need a little flexibility because my kid is sick and I really need to go pick them up. And what can I do to arrange for that and still get my work done? These things are important skills for everybody to have productive workplaces. And I want to stop people thinking that people with disabilities are charity cases. They're trying to get out of work. They're trying to get special favors and move towards a workplace where we think of everybody as individuals with strengths and weaknesses. Realize that the best teams have diversity already because you don't want everybody with the same strengths and weaknesses on your team, or some things are not getting done or not getting done well. You want people that have different strengths and weaknesses so they cover each other and everything gets done well. So, Rosemary, that's really sweet. Cool. I get distracted. You can tell I do have it. I have it pretty much under control, but I still get distracted by the comments. So I don't have to take a lot of time, and I know we have other people coming up. I do appreciate also that you're asking me on Attorney Day because, well, not everybody likes attorneys, but I feel like I'm here on Attorney Day. We are going to have that training in March 2nd. I saw that somebody asked for a link. I don't have a link to sign up yet, but you can watch the DAS website. And if I do get a link, I'll send it to Bobby so he can send it around, if that's okay, Bobby. But I also would like to ask you all a favor because I am trying to come up with really good practical examples to use. If you've seen any of my trainings, I don't like to just drone on and on about the law because, let's face it, that gets boring and it's hard to remember. People think and remember through story. And the most important advice is practical advice because I can tell you what you need to do or what you should do. But if you don't know how to do that or what that looks like, it's not going to get done. So yes, the DAS website at the DOR. So if you have questions, examples, things like that, either from a supervisee or supervisor perspective, please email me that because I would like to be able to incorporate as much as I can of that into this session, but also we're doing an ongoing series, so there will be other sessions. And I want to make this something that really helps. I would love to do, I am always dreaming up side projects because I can only do like the legal work stuff at work, but there's so much more than just the legal work. There's so much other stuff that I'm passionate about having to do with disability and employment. But I'd really like to get, especially like the state of California, that's at least in theory a model employer, get resources together, get examples together to help people who want to accomplish that goal to see that it's not undoable. It's not even really that hard. But if you're thinking, I don't know how to do this, how can I give examples from my lived experience, from the thousands of people I talk to help people to be able to get access to resources that help them see, I can do this. It's not hard. And access for people that are in these fights to be able to show someone, I'm having trouble explaining it because it's always harder to explain your own situation. But this is something that really shows what, this is what I'm looking for and how easy it can be to do it. That's all I'm asking for. So please do send me information. You're also free to call me anytime you want. And I'd be happy to come back and report back if you all are not able to go to it and just give you the highlights of the training and the plans for the next session. I'm happy to come back anytime you want me because I always enjoy all the SDAC or individual DAC groups that I've ever spoken to. I can't say that about every group I've spoken to. I can't say that about others. You're not the only ones, but you're definitely in the, I've never had a bad experience. And I really appreciate you giving me the time to talk. So, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer some questions.
Thank you. As always, such a, presentation filled with empathy, passion, and kindness. During your presentation, I observed many of these heart emojis floating around, and people are commenting, and they were so it was a great presentation. So now is the time for people to unmute, ask your question to Paula, or post it in the chat. Let's see. Do we have, there are a whole bunch of positive comments here. Super inspiring, Paula. Thank you for sharing with us. And then a lot of comments about variety of things. My question to you is, how can employers better support employees with invisible disabilities?
I think one of the first steps is to create a relationship in your units where there is psychological safety for people to be able to speak up and ask for accommodations if they need them. Because a lot of the problems happen when people are too afraid to even disclose. And that's not good for them because things can go south before they get the chance to ask for accommodations. But it's also not good for the employer because they're losing good people just because they can't have a problem solving conversation because people are scared to talk about what the real underlying problem is. And they're taking disciplinary action that's not going to help, right? Like if you were disciplining somebody for not being as productive when they needed less distraction, going back to the wall example again, you can tell them they need to be more productive and get their productivity levels all you want. You can scream it at them, you can send them emails, you can, do whatever you want. But if they're still being distracted, and it's not going to change. On the other hand, putting up a wall, letting them have a headset, whatever, could change it overnight. So why are we creating workplaces where we're not free to talk about what the real problem is so that we can problem solve instead of problem blame and spin our wheels? I think the other thing is training all supervisors, and this is a ongoing problem. Actually, since the pandemic, it's been worse of what they call accidental managers. So there are a lot of managers out there that have been put in management positions who maybe didn't even really want it, but they get no training. And then they've seen, well, why don't you ask for training? Well, they're not going to go ask their employer for management training because it sounds like admitting that I'm not competent for my managerial job. Like I want the money and the promotion. I want to do my job well. I just don't know where to go for help, which is what spurred when I was doing research for some other project. I was like, that spurred this desire to build resources for managers to have easy access without going to your employer, without having to pay thousands of dollars for these like wild courses, but just to get access to some basic managerial skills. And among the top of what should be required is skills in communication, in flexibility, and in problem solving, because that will help them to accommodate their disabled employees and will also help them to get more productivity out of their non-disabled employees. I think those are the first steps.
Great. Thank you. Alex, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Paula. Again, thank you very much. I have a comment and then a question. So you mentioned that a supervisor that can supervise persons with disabilities are much better equipped to supervise, and that the knowledge of existence of visible and invisible disabilities is very helpful. That leads to the thought I share of that becoming a member of the disability community is the only group you can become a part of at any time in your life. So to do the good for persons with disabilities and not think about what's in it for you right now, do it for yourself, and importantly, do it for others. And now for my question. Have you ever had in your experience that an ability to supervise persons with disabilities is impacted negatively by the culture of the employer and not necessarily the supervisor? Like the supervisor is knowledgeable about disabilities, but is impeded from being an effective supervisor for persons with disabilities because of the culture.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of fear in changing your management style from what is the norm in your culture at your employer. And to differing degrees, because sometimes that might not be the case. People are open to different managing styles. Um, I've also seen that the culture can affect the individual managers because if the culture is one where they don't believe in that accommodations are important, and like managers are never graded on that, there's no negative consequence, even if they're not following the law, like you have an accommodation and they're not honoring it, then you're not going to get that. So there has to be culture change, and there has to be, if you have a culture change, then you support the managers that want to do the right thing. You also hire more managers that want to do the right thing. And you also teach and train the ones that either don't want to or don't know how to do the right thing. So the culture, I think, is central to all of it, because at a workplace, you never want to go against the grain, really. I won't say that, because I do like to speak out. If I think there's an injustice going on, it's really hard for me to just shut up and sit there and watch it happen. That's a personal situation. But even with me having that really strong, justice stubbornness, or whatever you might call it, I still am scared to speak out if I'm in a culture where leadership takes things personally. If you say that what they're doing could be done to better, and there's a lot of that goes around, or if the culture is that we do things just perfect, and like it's kind of like the dysfunctional family where like we all just smile and look perfect for the Christmas pictures, and it's not the people that are causing the problem in the family that's the problem. The problem is anybody who speaks out and actually, it's the truth teller who tells somebody that not all is well. There's abusive stuff going on. So there are a lot of culture things that keep people from doing the job they could do. There's also a lot of problems with promotion. Like if you promote people that under standards that are either deliberately or not deliberately non-inclusive, because you promote people who think and work just like the people in leadership, for example, and are not flexible or whatever, and you don't have these ways of valuing diversity and flexibility and all of these skills, then there again, if you want to be promoted, if you want to get raises, then you are going to just shut up and go along, even if you think you could do it better, because it's to your detriment to try to do the right thing.
Thank you, Paula. And then just a follow-up question, just based on what your response was right now. Um, do you find that employers that have a good disability culture have mandatory trainings specifically with regards to persons with disabilities? Like it's not optional.
I don't think I have enough data to say that, to give you any answer about whether corporations or entities that do or don't have specific differences. What I do find is that it makes sense, and what I've seen is when they do have trainings, it does open the eyes of some people. So I think it's helpful. But what I've also seen, and we talk about this a lot, we have a lot of committees at DRC. And one of them is trauma informed, like workplace committee. And we've talked a lot about how it's important to not just have a mandatory training where half the people are off camera on their phones, not paying attention or whatever, but things where they're very practical. And when you actually practice these skills, so that instead of like, okay, here's my checklist of mandatory trainings. I checked off that box, but I really didn't absorb it. Some people, I think it's so worth it because some people will absorb it because they do care. And when they hear better and learn better, they will do better. But it's even more effective if there's more practical trainings, if there's more practicing of the skills, and if there are consequences if you do not implement the things that you're learning about, like not just a mandatory training where you have to go to this training, but in your evaluation, it will come up as to whether you are actually implementing those practices or not.
Okay, thank you. That added some additional insight for my own self to consider and chew on in future. So thank you, Paula.
Sure.
I have another follow-up question for you, Paula. What legal trends are emerging in disability rights advocacy that you have seen?
Well, it's kind of a hit and miss right now because we have a lot of attacks on disability and employment at the federal level. I feel really lucky to be in California where our state laws and enforcement are still there, but we have our own budget problems, so enforcement is always a problem. As far as the court cases are going, I know that work from home is a very, as an accommodation, is very a high concern to state employees. And there are more and more cases that are making it to the appellate level where you can get opinions that are that everybody has to follow that's in that jurisdiction. And those are coming out kind of all over the place, but the trend is actually that there are several of them that are better than pre-pandemic. I think the pandemic showed that a lot of the statements employers were making about how you need to be in the office just weren't true. There are people that have a track record of being able to do really good work and sometimes better work from home. There's also some good movement from some jurisdictions. You have to keep an eye on it because it's fast moving. It's jurisdiction by jurisdiction. But also there's always been fight back. Like, for example, I have PTSD from driving. And then before they would say, I don't get any like credit. If I said I needed to work from home because it was hard for me to drive to the office, they would say, well, we don't have to care about your commute. Just like, workers' comp, the commute is separate. I don't think it is because if I have to commute, then by the time I get to my office, I already have depleted a lot of reserves and have to take some time to put myself together. My concentration is bad and stuff like that. That's kind of argument that I've been talking about people making. And now we are actually seeing some judges saying, no, you don't get to say the commute is not part of it. If you're making them go to the office, then they get to, if you're making them commute to the office for your purposes, then you get to, then you should be willing to talk about how the commute affects their disability and other kinds of reasoning like that, where the commute's coming in. And I think that's a really positive development. It's not across the board, but yeah, I think there's a lot going on. It's slow and steady, but I think we need to keep pushing. And I would like also to point out that from a legislative standpoint, people think like we have the Fair Employment and Housing Act, so we've solved the accommodation problem, right? But those of us with disabilities know that that law is great, and I'm glad we have it, much better than not having it. But there are so many ways for employers to throw up roadblocks or for enforcement to be problematic or for doctors to be problematic or different ways that things cannot go right, that maybe they need to look at it again and realize that it's not all that it could be and implementation problems are there, even if the framework is a good framework. So I think it's not just on the like judges level, but also on a legislative level, helping to have people understand that having done this is not the end of the discussion because it probably needs to be tweaked in ways to make it more effective.
Great. Thank you so much. I just have one follow-up clarification, and then I'm going to turn it to Carrie. She's got her hand up. I'll get back to you in a second, Carrie. My clarifying question to you, Paula, you mentioned about the commute thing. You mentioned about various jurisdiction and some appellate ruling that might be looking at that. I want to be clear about it within this platform. It's not a settled law, and it's not a legal authority that the state employee should be pointing to when they're asking for this consideration, correct?
Right. You would need to have like a federal case in the Ninth Circuit,
right?
That was binding on California, or you wouldn't have to have like California courts to be binding on California. So just because there's a case like I'll just pick a state because I don't have it at hand, or like in North Dakota or something.
Yeah.
That's good news to see that judges are thinking it that way. And you can even use the arguments that they make to say this is why it makes sense, but it's not binding on any employers in California.
Great.
So that's why I say you have to track, it's fast moving. You have to track what's happening in different jurisdictions because it may not be happening in your jurisdiction.
Yeah, I just want people in this audience to get the impression that just because it's mentioned and talked about and there's some notoriety about this subject, that they can utilize that in advocating for themselves when they're doing this with their reasonable accommodation process, because that's not going to do them any good.
You will not have a case that will back that.
Right.
Now, but keep track of the
keep track of it.
Because next month there could be.
Things could change. All right, great. Carrie, you've been patiently have your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, that's okay. I don't mind waiting. Hi, Paula. It's always wonderful to see you. I wanted to circle back to the issue of training. Very selfishly, I will say I'm currently working on putting together a reasonable accommodations training for supervisors and managers, um, just kind of bringing more disability etiquette awareness and empathy into that process, and what's the right way to engage if an employee discloses a disability, that kind of a thing. And I'm curious, two things. One, do you think that in person is better for this kind of training? You mentioned people they're not on camera, they're not paying attention, and I tend to have that same issue. And I don't think that people take it seriously. I wonder if in person would be better, and that's what I'm arguing for. And two, is the training that will be posted on the DAS website February or March? And will there be an in-person version of that training?
That I believe it'll just be webinar, and
Okay.
it's going to occur on February 2nd, but they usually don't have the recording up right away.
Okay.
So it'll be a while for that. And then as far as in person or not, um, as somebody that really cares about accommodations, I hate to say, yeah, you can only do it in person to get people to pay attention, because some people might be better off doing it remotely, because of disability reasons or because of their learning style and their ability to maintain no distractions or whatever. I think you can do things remotely, but they should be done with follow-up to make sure that people were paying attention. So I hate to even say you should require cameras on, because there are a lot of people that that's very difficult for. But, if you are having breakout sessions, if you're having like quizzes afterwards, if you're having like feedback or something, then you can do that. I think probably for most people, it's easier to learn it in person than pay attention in person, because people will notice. But I've seen people like spacing out during in-person meetings too, or being on their phone. So, I don't like to say like there's a one best way for everybody, but whatever you're doing, just be mindful that if you don't follow it to make sure they were paying attention, and they know at the time that there's going to be follow-up to make sure they were paying attention, then you're going to have a lot of people multitasking, because that's what we do these days.
Yeah, I love your comment about being accountable for the material that's presented to you. Any any suggestions from anybody in the group, if you want to chat me about putting together this kind of training or how to hold people accountable, I'll put my email in the chat too, and would love just input, suggestions, recommendations from anybody who's willing to provide them. So
Well,
thank
I'd love to talk to you about it, so
you.
contact me
Yeah.
anytime.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'm
Mhm.
just going to throw out there really quick, just something I was typing as you both were talking. So back to the leadership being the infusion of culture from the top down and impacts the management styles and trainings. And this is not like a well thought out thing, so don't think that it is. But I'm wondering if engagement on online items can be driven by interaction to be more effective, to require feedback in real time, like questions and answers, clicking things on the screen, back and forth live interactions by group breakouts, rather than just watching a video and calling that a training.
Yeah, I will say that. I will say that's an all. Okay. I think the training should be in real time, because people do pay more attention, and you can pay more attention when you're talking, and you can tailor it more to your audience. I also think it's good to record the training so that people that do have like processing disorders or whatever can go back and listen to it and catch the things that they didn't, or maybe if they didn't do as well as in the post test. But yeah, I think that's good
Great.
feedback.
Thank you, Paula. Excellent presentation as always. You're such a wealth of information, inspiration, and passion and kindness. So please come back, see us anytime. And
Anytime. Thank you.
thanks again for being here, and happy holidays.
You too.